In the heart of a forgotten land, where the rivers whispered secrets to the wind and the mountains stood tall like ancient guardians, a man rose to power, Pastor Cuthwale. His church, the sacred throne of glory, was unlike any other. It was a place where the impossible happened before the very eyes of the people. The blind would see, the lame would dance, and the sick would walk away healed. People from distant villages spoke of him as the second after God. His voice carried a divine force, shaking the heavens and commanding the earth. He prayed, and rain fell in times of famine. He called, and the dead woke from their graves. Is he an angel, a prophet, or could he be God himself in human form? The people whispered in wonder. Pastor Cuthwale had a charm that no one could resist. His smile was warm like the morning sun, and his words felt like honey dripping from the heavens. The rich and the poor, the kings and the commoners, none could resist his voice. But behind the dazzling miracles, behind the glorious sermons that turned sinners into saints, was a secret buried in the shadows of the night. When the sun set and the world drifted into sleep, Pastor Cuthwale's real journey began. No one knew where he went, no one dared to follow, for his footsteps vanished like smoke in the air. But far away, beyond the eyes of his beloved congregation, he stood before his true masters, the spirits of the ancient ones. He had many sacred places where no mortal dared to step. Deep within the thick forest, where ancient trees whispered forbidden secrets. On the tallest mountain, where the wind carried voices only he could hear. By the silent rivers and lakes, where dark waters swallowed the echoes of his chants. At the graveyards where the dead still listened and answered his call. Each place gave him a different power. The river spirits gave him healing. The mountain spirits gave him dominion over nature. The grave spirits gave him the power over life and death. And the spirits of the forest gave him the power to command the unseen. He had a Bible, not the one known to men, but one given to him by his ancestors. Its pages were not of paper, but of something else, something ancient and alive. The words on it changed every time he opened it, and only he could understand them. The fame of Pastor Cuthwale spread like wildfire. Every day, thousands flocked to the sacred throne of glory, eager to witness his miracles. And he never disappointed. He healed the sick with just a whisper. He commanded rain to fall on barren lands. He made the dumb speak and the deaf hear. He raised the dead, calling them by name as if they had just been asleep. He walked on water before an astonished crowd. He turned dry wells into springs of fresh water. He multiplied food, feeding entire villages with a single loaf of bread. He touched a tree, and it bore fruit instantly. He tamed wild beasts, making lions sit like harmless cats before him. He transformed enemies into loyal followers with just a touch. The world bowed before him, for no man had ever walked with such power. Even other pastors left their churches to join his, saying, "Truly, this man has seen the face of God." But no one knew the price of his power. When night fell, the man of miracles disappeared. His sacred journey began. In the darkest part of the forest, he knelt before an altar unseen by the living. Shadows danced around him as he whispered in a language lost to time. The spirits of the forest listened, their voices echoing in the wind. "More power! Give me more power to rule this world," he pleaded. By the river he stood under the moonlight, calling the spirits of the deep. The waters trembled, and a mist rose, whispering forgotten secrets into his ears. On the lonely mountain, where no foot had ever stepped, he met the ancient spirits of the wind. They gave him the power to command the storms, to summon rain at will. And at the graveyard, he spoke to those who had left the world. He called their names, and they answered from the dust. Many had tried to follow him, to discover his secret. But strange things happened to them. They saw nothing but darkness where he stood. They heard whispers in a language unknown. They felt a cold touch, yet saw no hand, and their bodies refused to move, as if held by unseen chains. Terrified, they ran back, never daring to speak of what they had encountered. But Pastor Kuthwale saw them all. He smiled in the darkness, for none could see him, yet he could see everyone. Day by day, his power grew. The sacred throne of glory became the greatest church ever known. Kings sought his blessings, the sick traveled miles for his healing, and sinners wept at his feet. "I have gone to heaven alive," he declared one day, standing before his followers. "I have seen the throne of God, and he has placed me next to him. There is none before me, except him." The congregation wept in awe. "Truly he is not a man. He is the second after God," they shouted. And so the world bowed before Pastor Kuthwale, the man of divine miracles. But deep in the forests, the mountains, the rivers, and the graveyards, his true masters watched him. Would they continue to grant him power, or would they one day come for what they were owed? And what if someone, somewhere, discovered his secret? Pastor Kuthwale stood at the highest point of Mount Nyoka, his sacred mountain where only he could climb. The wind howled, whispering voices only he could understand. The spirits of his ancestors had come again, but this time, they had more demands. "You seek more power?" A deep voice echoed from the mountain. "Yes, I want to rule the world with miracles." Pastor Kuthwale replied, his hands raised high. The spirits laughed, a low, thunderous sound that shook the mountain. "Then you must bring us more souls, more youth. The young ones are the key to the future. Corrupt them, lead them into our ways, and we shall make you invincible." Pastor Kuthwale bowed, his heart pounding with excitement. He was ready for anything. The very next Sunday, before his great congregation, Pastor Kuthwale made a special announcement. "The Lord has spoken to me. The youth are the foundation of our faith. I have been instructed to organize youth Bible camps, where they will learn the deep secrets of the Holy Spirit." The people cheered. Parents rushed to register their children. They trusted their powerful pastor completely. The camps were grand, held in foreign lands, luxurious resorts, and great cities. But the teachings there were not of heaven. He encouraged free courtship. Young men and women were told to explore their love before marriage. He changed the church dress code. Mini skirts, backshow dresses, and revealing clothes were now acceptable. He told the youth that drinking and partying were part of worship. He preached that adultery was a way of expressing God's grace. "Do not be bound by old ways," he declared. "The Holy Spirit is happy when you enjoy life. Do not judge yourselves. Love freely. Live freely." The youth cheered. They danced, partied, and spread his teachings. His fame grew even more. The sacred throne of glory became the biggest youth-followed church in the world, and the spirits of his ancestors were pleased. With his influence stronger than ever, Pastor Kuthwale was given a new order from his ancestors. "There are those who doubt you, those who question your power. They must be removed. Bring them to us." He felt no fear, only joy. So, in one of his great Sunday services, he stood before the congregation and prophesied, "The Lord has spoken to me. He told me that those who reject my teachings will start dying mysteriously." The people gasped in fear. No one dared to question him. 2 weeks later, in the quiet village of Mwenzi, a family who had been whispering doubts about Pastor Kuthwale suffered a terrible fate. 3 of their members died in a mysterious car accident. People rushed to the pastor, begging him to pray for them. "This is why I warned you," he said with a sorrowful face. "Those who reject the Holy Spirit will perish." The congregation trembled in fear. His power was unquestionable now, but what they didn't know was that he was the one behind their deaths. That night, He went to the graveyard where they had been buried. No one saw him go. No one heard his footsteps. But those sitting near bonfires in the village felt something strange. The fire turned blue and green, flickering like a ghostly flame. They heard whispers from nowhere, calling out their names. The wind blew in circles, even though the trees stood still. Some felt their bodies freeze, unable to move or speak. They ran back to their houses, too scared to look behind them. But Pastor Cuthwale was smiling in the darkness. By midnight, he had done the unthinkable. He called the dead bodies from their graves and carried them to his ancestors. Their souls were now bound to him, making him even stronger. Encouraged by his success, Pastor Cuthwale decided to attack another family. This time he wanted to send a clearer message. In the village of Kipolo, a man named Jonathan had started questioning him. He had told his friends, "A true man of God does not preach what Pastor Cuthwale preaches. Something is wrong." Word reached Pastor Cuthwale. "The spirits demand another soul," he whispered under the stars. The very next evening, Jonathan's wife and children were involved in a terrible fire accident. The house burned down with them inside. The village wept. They called Pastor Cuthwale for prayers. Standing before them, he lifted his hands and declared, "The Holy Spirit is cleansing his people. Those who doubt will perish." And the people believed him more than ever. No one dared to doubt him again. Pastor Cuthwale was now more powerful than ever. The spirits of his ancestors gave him new abilities. He could see into the future. He could control people's minds. He could walk through walls unseen. He could summon spirits to do his will. He could appear in different places at once. The world worshipped him. Leaders, celebrities, and even presidents sought his blessing. He was no longer a man, he was a god in human form, or so he thought. But something strange started happening. Every time he stood before a mirror, his reflection disappeared for a few seconds. The Bible, given to him by his ancestors, started changing words, sometimes showing warnings. Some nights, he would hear strange footsteps in his own house, even though no one was there. His shadow moved differently from his body. He began having nightmares of faceless spirits staring at him. The power was strong, but something was wrong. Had he gone too far, or was something coming for him? One evening, as he sat alone in his grand estate, a strange silence filled the room. The chandelier above flickered and the air turned cold. Then a whisper, so soft, so chilling, brushed against his ear. "You promised us." Pastor Cuthwale spun around, his heart pounding. No one was there. "You promised us." The voice grew louder. The walls of his mansion seemed to breathe, shifting as if they were alive. The ground beneath him trembled. He reached for his sacred staff, the one that had been blessed by the spirits, but it felt cold, lifeless. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning like dying embers. It pointed at him. "You owe us." Pastor Cuthwale stumbled back. "I have given you everything. I have led them to you. The youth, the doubters, the weak. I have given them all." The figure did not move. But the room filled with whispers. Hundreds of voices. Some were familiar. The voices of those who had died under mysterious circumstances. "You will pay." Then, as quickly as it had come, the darkness retreated. The air warmed. The chandelier steadied. Pastor Cuthwale sat alone in his sacred chamber, deep in thought. The power he had once desired was now a heavy burden. The ancestors were demanding more than he could handle. They were no longer satisfied with simple sacrifices. They wanted more souls, more devotion, more darkness. At first, he had enjoyed their gifts, miracles beyond imagination, the power to control minds, and the fear he commanded. But now the ancestors enjoyed the game too much. Strange things started happening. His reflection in mirrors no longer matched his movements. At night, whispers filled his room, calling his name over and over. He would wake up in different places, not knowing how he got there. His dreams became nightmares, visions of faceless spirits dragging him into darkness. Objects moved in his house on their own. He knew he was losing control. The ancestors were no longer asking. They were forcing him. For the first time, Pastor Kuthwale started ignoring their calls. Whenever he felt the pull of their voices, he pretended not to hear. Whenever the spirits whispered, he blocked his ears. But the ancestors were not fools. They knew he was trying to escape their grip. So one Sunday, as he was preaching before his greatest congregation, they came to him. As Pastor Kuthwale stood on the altar, delivering his most powerful sermon yet, a strange wind blew into the church. The congregation felt something different, a heavy, invisible presence that made the air thick and cold. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Then, the church shook like an earthquake, but only for a moment. The people gasped in fear. They saw shadows moving along the walls, yet there was no one there. Pastor Kuthwale knew what was happening. The ancestors had come, but he couldn't let the people know. He quickly lifted his hands and declared, "The Holy Spirit is here. More miracles shall happen today." To cover up his fear, he called for miracles like never before. He pointed at a blind woman. Her eyes opened instantly, and she screamed, "I can see! I can see!" A man without legs suddenly grew new ones and ran around the church. A baby born deaf began to sing like an angel. A woman declared dead a week before walked into the church, confused but alive. A pool of water appeared at the altar, and when the sick touched it, they were healed. A crippled man floated in the air before landing on his feet, completely healed. The congregation fell to their knees, crying and shouting praises. Pastor Kuthwale smiled, but inside he was trembling. He knew these miracles were not from him. They were from the ancestors. After that service, he had no choice. The ancestors had proved their power before thousands. If he didn't give them what they wanted, they might expose him. So, he bowed before them that night and declared, "I will serve you completely. I will never doubt you again." The ancestors laughed in satisfaction. "Then we shall walk with you in many more places," they whispered. Pastor Kuthwale started inviting the ancestors more boldly. At political rallies, he would call upon them, and storms would clear the skies, making him look like a prophet of the land. At funerals, he would bring back the dead, just for a few minutes, before letting them collapse again, convincing people that only he could talk to heaven. At weddings, he called upon the spirits to predict the future of couples, making him the greatest marriage counselor. At his private meetings, he could now command money to appear out of thin air. The world believed in him completely, but deep inside, he knew the truth. The ancestors had full control now, and something darker was coming. The whispers in his room grew louder. They no longer came at night, but followed him throughout the day. When he spoke to people, he would sometimes hear a second voice, one that was not his own. The shadows that once moved along the walls now had shape. When he blinked, he could see them, tall, thin creatures with hollow faces. They were watching. One night, as he sat in his mansion, the room suddenly turned cold. A powerful force pressed against his chest, holding him in place. His breath became short, his body frozen. Then, from the darkness, a voice whispered directly into his ear, "You belong to us." The chandelier above flickered wildly before crashing to the floor. The windows shattered. A cold wind roared through the house, carrying laughter, deep guttural laughter that came from everywhere at once. "You promised us?" the voice continued. Pastor Kuthwale struggled, but he couldn't move. The ancestors had come for their due. "You are ours." His body lifted from the chair. His arms stretched out against his will. He tried to scream, but no sound left his mouth. The spirits were inside him now, moving through his blood, taking what was left of his soul. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The wind disappeared. The room fell silent. But the warning was clear.